Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hold. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on March 24th, 2023 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, as usual, my housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And just a reminder, the show drops now every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time and 2 p.m. Eastern. So you can listen then to the new podcast or anytime after, or you can go to the site anytime and catch up on the current podcast before the new one drops. And while you're there on the website, you'll see above the most recently posted show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy. And this is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Steven Forrest, who is one of my mentors, about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, actually needs to be happy. I've said this before, but it's based on an interview that I did with Steve a couple of years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. So if you download this freebie, yes, it will sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, which will keep you posted on upcoming podcasts or on ones that were recently dropped. But of course you can unsubscribe anytime. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, again, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some of Steven Forrest's astrological words of wisdom. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, and which is where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I also post now on Instagram under karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. And finally, I'm offering still my discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, and that is for radio show listeners only. So if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart, in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and you'd like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back from achieving your most cherished desires, whether they're in the areas of greatest interest to you, be that relationships, career, job, finances, and or health, since these are the four major issues most people do come to astrologers for, then this is the reading for you. During this reading, we'll look at how the energies into which you entered this lifetime may be keeping you stuck in old habitual patterns, or what I call conditioned behavior, and how this knowledge can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward. So if you'd like to learn to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, that is easy when you take advantage of this special discounted offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. As I love to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so now let's get into this week's Astro News you can use. Let's first understand that we're right now in the waxing phase of this month's lunar cycle, since the Aries new moon occurred on March 21st at 0 degrees and 50 minutes of the sign representing motivation, ambition, and assertion. And this tells us, especially since all the major planets are in forward motion right now, that all systems are pretty much go. As long as we curb Aries' archetypal tendency to be impatient and or impulsive, we can look forward now with the kind of confidence and assuredness Aries grants us to be proactive, independent, and to use our visceral, intuitive capabilities to better ascertain which way the wind is blowing in case we need to make a sudden pivot. The Mars-ruled Aries archetype is about, among other things, it's about protection, as in we have to use our wits to determine quickly the best way to protect ourselves. There's something primal about Aries. There's something ancient about it. And once we can do that, we're then in a position to help defend and protect others who might be weaker or more vulnerable than us, which is the highest and best use of this archetypal energy. So planting seeds at this past lunation that will blossom into a better understanding of how to use our own basic instincts to best protect ourselves is a large part of Aries' natural archetypal capability. Remember, Mars-ruled Aries represents the first house in the natural zodiacal wheel in Western tropical astrology. That means all of us who use this type of astrology or get readings from astrologers who employ it, the first house is always Mars-ruled, and so it carries a Mars connotation. We place over it the sign of your ascendant, which rules the first house also in your particular chart. But always the first house is a means of how we identify ourselves in the physical incarnate world. So as such, it represents birth, or the emergence from the realm of the watery, uroboric waters of the womb into the living, breathing physical world where one becomes an individual with an identity. So it takes the fetus signaling the mother that it's time to be born for this to happen, which is a large part of the reason why this archetype defines proactivity. The baby or fetus instinctively knows it's time for her to be born, and in the natural scheme of things, this is what happens. And this is why the emergence of spring is equated with the movement of the sun into Aries at the spring, or it's also known as the vernal equinox, which occurred this past week on March 20th. That it was followed by the March Aries new moon was coincidental, but another thing to point out here is that we're going to be experiencing 2 Aries new moons between this lunar cycle and the next. They won't be in the same month because obviously a month after March 21st is not going to be in March, but we'll get into that in a second. So again, because the March 21st Aries new moon occurred so close to the beginning of its sign that on April 5th or 6th, depending on your time zone, when we experience the Libra full moon at 16 degrees and 7 minutes of the Libra Aries polarity, and note that this is approximately going to be halfway through these zodiacal signs. So the new moon at the beginning of Aries, the full moon in Libra opposing Aries, both of them almost halfway through their signs, will be followed by a second Aries new moon on April 19th or 20th, again, depending on your actual time zone. But to make matters even more interesting, we'll be experiencing this second Aries new moon as a solar eclipse, and that will occur at 29 degrees and 50 minutes of Aries, or at the very end of this zodiacal sign. And that means that we'll have essentially 2 opportunities to plant these proactive seeds, but many of these may well turn out to be related to helping us heal or motivating us to heal past wounds about which we may not have spoken up or out about in the past. And that's because by the time we get to the April 5th or 6th Libra full moon, when she'll be opposing the Aries sun, it will be tightly conjoined to wounded healer Chiron on one side in Aries and waxing just a few degrees away from Jupiter in Aries. So we'll talk more about that this week, but I wanted to plant that seed because, it's an interesting thing based on some of the other things I'm going to get into now. So let's put that on hold for just a moment because I want to look at what's occurring now first before we get to the full moon and anything past that. So we're shifting right now out of last month's vague Piscean lack of factual clarity and moving into the ability to shine the brighter light of day onto what before seemed confusingly murky. And that's because earlier this past week, the Pisces sun pulled away from confusing Neptune and its square to Mars in Gemini and sextiled Pluto in Capricorn just before he entered Aries at the spring equinox, as I said, on March 20th, and we hit the Aries new moon on March 21st. So this provided us and provides us still, since again, we're in the early waxing monthly phase of the lunar cycle, the opportunity to move from chaos to clarity, to focus on the deeper meaning of our lives moving forward. And this tells us it's time to realign our intentions away from wishful thinking and toward making changes within both our personal lives and the collective. And the kinds of change, these will be the kinds of changes that allow both personal and societal reform. We're going to get more into this in a minute, but that's, because Pluto was involved. So Pluto is a planet of societal reform. So the Aries new moon energy we're in right now is meant to motivate us to plant seeds that will blossom into implementing our future plans. And again, that's especially true because all the planets are direct now. But first, between now and then, we've got Pluto making his long-awaited entrance into Aquarius yesterday, March 23rd, and I'm going to get into much more about that in just a few, and Mars entering sensitive, nurturing Cancer tomorrow on March 25th. Now, since Mars was transiting through Gemini at the actual Aries new moon, he brought a new start, in a sense, to his past 7-month mission to defend and protect children involved in early childhood learning, among other Geminian themes, such as communication, siblings, near neighborhood, and local business and transportation. So if we look back to Mars' ingress into Gemini on August 21st of 2022 last year, and to his subsequent retrograde period from October 30th through January 12th of 2023, that's October 30th of 2022, of course, through this year's station direct on January 12th, and his direct motion up until now, we can recognize how much energy from within the collective has been devoted to the topic of, and I'm putting quotations around this, protecting children from information or communication or teaching that some might believe harm their future development. And clearly this has been visible in the form of so many school boards around the country, in the U.S. in particular, trying to ban books they deem inappropriate for children, as well as the lashing out at the story time with drag queens, and even more notable against transgender kids, and so much more. So that this period became a fight against what's taught in American schools and by whom, and what books children are allowed to read or learn from, or learn in the classroom, even if it's taught by the specific teacher, not to mention issues like the whole critical race theory being banned in the lower grades when it's not even actually taught there. It's not taught until college level, maybe, or if one attends law school. And these protests against defining one's own gender identity, we can look back now and recognize the war on both communication and all its corresponding issues. Communication is that's how we learn, right? Where Gemini is a curious archetype. You ask questions, you get answers. You ask person A the question, they give you one answer. You ask question person B, they give you another answer. You keep searching until you can figure out which answer makes the most sense to you, right? But there's the war on that and on sexuality, because Mars, after all, rules male sexuality, or in Jungian terms, it rules our animus, or the inner masculine part of any person, regardless of gender's energetic makeup. So Mars travels in Gemini related to more than that as well, but these would seem to be the major themes that have consumed the airspace during his long transit through this air sign: the war against learning and against choosing one's gender or sexuality. So what ultimately will come of it remains to be seen, but clearly this particular Mars transit set off a situation where some people believe censorship is the best way to protect children from quote-unquote corrupting ideas, while others embrace the free flow of information regardless, in the name of creating smart, well-informed children who become adults adept at critical thinking skills in the long run. So Mars' entrance into Cancer on March 23rd, yesterday, where he'll remain until May 20th, which is when he'll enter Leo, may now continue its focus on protecting children, but shift its most intense focus away from early learning, early childhood learning, and more to mothers and babies. So shortly after his ingress into Cancer, Mars also quincunx Pluto, again yesterday, March 23rd, Pluto newly being in Aquarius, and the collective may well adjust its proactive efforts moving forward away again from defending children against whatever evils we believe are out there in the form of exposing them to, learning, and this issue over transgender kids and their rights, etc., to, be whatever whatever gender they choose, regardless of what they were at birth. This may shift to defending mothers who give birth to these children, or alternatively, to declaring war against the same. And that takes us into the realm of the current status of health care for pregnant women under the most recent attempts by conservatives to outlaw abortion in all forms under state laws currently in effect throughout the nation. And that's not to mention the pending decision by the Trump-appointed conservative Texas judge who holds the fate of the 20-year FDA-approved abortion medication mifepristone in his hands. It's clear his decision may ban the ability of both doctors and or other healthcare providers to prescribe and pharmacists to dispense this medication. So we've already seen legal cases arise and horror stories about lost pregnancies and dangers to the lives of the mothers who cannot get the proper medical care until their lives are actually endangered under the definition of some of these state laws. So what I'm saying is, given that Mars has moved into Cancer and quincunx Pluto, March 23rd, the call becomes now to adjust how we defend and protect both mothers and the unborn, and how we control dealing with any anger born of hurt, lest it become destructive to both ourselves and or others. So the battle has already been shaping up to be whether Mars in Cancer fights more for the unborn babies at the expense of the mother and her health, or fights for the mother at the expense of her child, with the understanding that once born, this child might be motherless if her health is not prioritized during pregnancy. So since Cancer's energy revolves around protection and nurturing, right? So Cancer is sensitive like a mother is about protecting and nurturing her child. So Cancer is compassionate. Cancer is, sometimes uber protective, etc. And Mars is a fighter. So the fighting on both sides of this issue is likely to continue, if not expand, since Jupiter's still in Mars-ruled Aries until he enters Taurus on May 16th. So keep a lookout, too, between now and then, since as soon as Mars enters Leo on May 20th, he will oppose Pluto in Aquarius about 12 hours later. And that's a pretty combustible energy, meaning something may well come to a head or explode within the collective, given that Pluto's in shock-oriented Aquarius then, and something like that might happen around that time. So we'll have to see how this energy between Mars making his quincunx to Pluto now, and waxing into his opposition to Pluto by May 20th, expresses within the collective over the next few months. So what needs to be adjusted now, in other words, to avoid a very combustible event or situation or collective energy arising, can we avoid that now, or are we destined to have things blow up? And if they do, which way will they go? Will they go in favor of Mars, or will they go in favor of Pluto, right? So meanwhile, back to the present. When Mercury meets wounded healer Chiron in Aries on March 26th, we're advised to temper any anger at those who've deceived us in the past, especially coming out of this Piscean past month, or at ourselves for having believed them or allowed ourselves to have been deceived by others, into a call to action to move forward and speak out in order to heal. And Mercury in Aries conjoins Jupiter there on March 27th and 28th, again, depending on your time zone, making this a time when many are able to broaden their intellectual views and become more tolerant. In other words, Jupiter's expansiveness helps expand our ability to communicate and to learn new information, which in turn can broaden our views and help us, as I said, become more tolerant. So, however, for some, it might mean becoming overly confident, this is the shadow side of Jupiter, about their righteous beliefs, whatever these may be, but also particularly related to A, religion, and B, law, which are two major things that Jupiter represents, without recognizing that there could be any fallibility in their moral viewpoints. And that would be due to a lack of attention to detail, at least in part, which is why we have the cliched expression, well, the devil is in the details, Mac. On a more personal level, however, this aspect is usually good for business and commercial activities because it grants excellent organizational abilities, as long, that is, as one does not overlook what seems to be, at the time, insignificant details, or the kind of details that might come back to throw a monkey wrench into the whole works eventually. In short, beware, especially related to business, beware of sloppy thinking now. So as we move now from the Aries new moon toward the lunar cycle's first quarter waxing square of the Cancer moon to the Aries sun on March 28th, those striving to become more conscious through astrological insight might now recognize the opportunity, again heralded by the March 21st Aries new moon, to leave behind the past for a clearer future that favors a fresh new start, especially in terms of our personal and collective beliefs. And we're tasked between now and the Libra full moon on April 5th and 6th, depending again on your time zone, to motivate ourselves to take some kind of action. That means we can choose to consciously allow this energy to help us forge ahead with our goals, as long as we take care not to A, move too fast and or incur the wrath of others now, because of the fact that both luminaries were still in waning squares to Mars and Gemini at this past lunation. But meanwhile, as slow-moving but powerful Pluto entered Aquarius, he's already made his mark as he was leaving the final degrees of Capricorn. Just ask the banking system. Okay, I am not going to talk more about the banking system this week. I did do a rather deep dive into that and my viewpoint astrologically on that last week, so feel free to have a listen to last week's podcast. But since the talk of the town in almost every astrological circle is Pluto's ingress into Aquarius yesterday, March 23rd, I think what happened... Pluto's ingress was yesterday, March 23rd, and the last time that happened was 246 years ago on April 4th of 1777. And I thought it's time to give this major energetic shift some deep introspective thought by looking back before we look ahead. Now, I'm sure many of you have already seen many different things written and discussed online or elsewhere about this ingress, and if the astrologers are good at what they do, they're all valid, right? But I want to focus on something that I learned about under the teachings of Michael Luton, which is how important recurrence is when an energy recurs. And here we have such a long cycle with Pluto recurring again, that, there's no one alive who was present in 1777, never mind any time during the 1700s or 1800s, right? So I think it will give us a better perspective of the kinds of energies that are going on right now, just related to certain specifics, right? We all know that Aquarius is technology, and there's a huge amount that I could talk about, and I probably will in the future about that. In fact, I would love to. But I want to get into just the literal history of what went on during these years leading up to Pluto's ingress into Aquarius when he was still in Capricorn, and then in the early days of Aquarius. So, most of us, again, know that the last time Pluto entered Aquarius was a time of great revolution. And since he transited through the sign of unexpected change, remember, Uranus ruled Aquarius's mantra is change is the only constant. And that occurred from April 4th, 1777, as I said, until April 11th of 1797. The world experienced both the American and French revolutions, and both were about overthrowing and gaining independence from tyrannical monarchies and replacing these systems with ones more responsive to average citizens. So, and most of us may remember this who grew up in America from our early childhood learning classes between kindergarten and the end of high school, learning somewhere in there, that the colonies declared their independence from the King of England in large part because they chafed against the notion of being taxed by the crown, but having no say in their own governance. So again, most Americans remember being taught in school the no taxation without representation cry of colonists in the Boston Harbor when they ransacked British vessels carrying shipments of British tea and other goods and threw them overboard into the water, thus destroying them. And that occurred on December 16th of 1773, clearly when Pluto was still in Capricorn, just as it was on July 4th of 1776 at the signing of the American Declaration of Independence. But the demolishing of British goods that were highly taxed when the people who were paying the taxes had no right to representation under the monarchy, that event, of course, became known as the Boston Tea Party. And colonists clearly considered this a violation of their rights, since they wanted to be taxed only by their own elected representatives and not by a parliament in which they were not at all represented. So it's interesting now to note that Pluto was transiting Capricorn also when the group of Republicans here in the United States who labeled themselves the Tea Party became prominent in 2009 and 10 during the Obama administration. Their issue was also taxation. According to Wikipedia, and here I quote, the Tea Party movement was an American fiscally conservative political movement within the Republican Party that began in 2009. Members of the movement called for lower taxes and for a reduction of the national debt and federal budget deficit through decreased government spending. The movement supported small government principles and opposed government-sponsored universal health care. The Tea Party movement has been described as both a popular constitutional movement and as a, quote, astroturf operation, end quote, purporting to be spontaneous and grassroots, but created by hidden elite interests. It was composed of a mixture of libertarian, right-wing populist, and conservative activism, and it sponsored multiple protests and supported various political candidates since 2009. And this is still according to Wikipedia. Although the Tea Party is not a political party in the classic sense of the word, research published in 2016 suggests that members of the Tea Party caucus voted like a significantly more right-wing third party in Congress. A major force behind it was Americans for Prosperity, a conservative political advocacy group founded by businessman and political activist David Koch. It is unclear how much money is donated to AFP by David Koch and his brother Charles Koch. Now, at this point, I believe it's Charles Koch who's deceased. I think David's still alive. I'm not positive. But still, obviously, this organization lives on. So, okay, so hold that thought, all right? Now let's go back to the French Revolution. Well, before I go there, let me just say that what are we dealing with now? We're dealing now in this country, in America, with a new sort of subset of the Tea Party, who were a lot of the right-wing congressmen in the House of Representatives who forced Kevin McCarthy there to make a whole bunch of very conservative-oriented compromises in order for him to gain their vote so that he could become the majority speaker of the House of Representatives. And that was back at the beginning of the year. And one of these conditions that he accepted was to help them to fight against the government expanding programs for the everyday people, like Medicare, like Social Security, like Medicaid, and like avoiding going into debt by not approving the Biden administration's budget proposal for this year. So many of you are doubtless familiar with this issue and how we have until this summer to approve a new budget, or we really take, the predictions are that this country will take a huge economic downslide and defaulting on its debt. Now remember that the debt ceiling, which is what the administration wants to raise, and what the faction of Republicans are against, is for debt that has already been incurred. It is not to fund future debt. So it's lenders calling in debt, right, that is legitimately owed. It's not saying, oh, don't take on new debt because we don't want you to. So this has been an argument, especially since the beginning of the 2009 Tea Party, which is really a party, as I just described, according to Wikipedia, a faction of the Republican conservatives who are for fiscal austerity über alles, right? So now let's go back to the French Revolution, which essentially began in February of 1787 with Pluto fully in Aquarius, and which was when, according to Encyclopedia Britannica's online site, and I quote, Charles Alexander de Calonne, and I have zero French accent, so pardon me, France's Comptroller General of Finances, assembles nobles and representatives of the bourgeoisie to discuss the country's budget deficit. Calonne suggests taxing the privileged classes, but the assembly refuses to take responsibility for that reform. Instead, the Assembly suggests convening the Estates General, which has not met since 1614. So we're in the year 1787, and they haven't done this since 1614. So fast forward to May 5th of 1789, and Encyclopedia Britannica continues, the Estates General, composed of representatives from the First Estate, clergy, the Second Estate, nobility, and the Third Estate, the lower classes, met at Versailles. They are immediately divided over the issue of whether to count by head or to give each estate equal votes. This is something that went on in the United States around the same time as well, right? In the Senate. 2 senators per state. It's not done by population, although the House of Representatives is. However, we go forward. June 17, 1789, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, the dispute over votes in the Estates General leads deputies of the Third Estate, that's the lower classes, to declare themselves the National Assembly. Along with some members of the clergy, they threatened to proceed without the other 2 estates. On June 20th of 1789, the Encyclopedia Britannica continues, royal officials lock the National Assembly, that's the Third Estate of the lower classes, out of their regular meeting hall. Members of the Assembly occupy the King's indoor tennis court. They take what comes to be known as the tennis court oath, promising not to disperse until they give France a new constitution. So again, I find it fascinating that what's going on now in the United States is that we again have the rise of this remnants of the Tea Party, which believes, which harks back to the Boston Tea Party and then again to the mid-2000s, which believes in small government and wants, as I said, to either abolish or cut the government's funding of social services. I'll repeat it again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, which subsidizes health care services and benefits to millions. And this includes also veterans, who've sacrificed, become disabled in some cases or in many cases because they fought wars on behalf of this country. So here's a little bit of an interesting synchronicity. President Biden gave a speech yesterday on March 23rd, which was the day of Pluto's ingress into Aquarius, commemorating the 13th anniversary of the Affordable Care Act, which dates back to that day in 2010. And I'm paraphrasing, but, Biden was quoted as saying the ACA was a big effing deal. And it was a big effing deal back then, and it's a big effing deal now. And he also lauded Democratic Representative Nancy Pelosi, who at the time spearheaded and shepherded the ACA through Congress to become law. Biden said, and this was a quote, "So many of you worked so hard to make history that day 13 years ago, so thank you. Millions and millions of people owe you a thank you. Remember when," and I'll paraphrase here again because this is part of what he said, "remember when a child with asthma couldn't get health coverage because of a pre-existing condition, or when a 22-year-old kid could be kicked off his parents' health care plan because he'd graduated from college, and also when women had to pay more than men for health insurance and so much more." He said, remember when if you lost your job, you lost your health care, when insurance companies could kick you off halfway through chemo because you'd reached the limit of what they were willing to pay. Imagine at the most vulnerable point in a person's life to hear the words, "Sorry, your coverage has run out." And though there are good people in the GOP, Biden said, this ain't your father's Republican Party anymore. "I think it's a matter of what you value," he said, "and I think we all deserve peace of mind over things that we cannot control." Before the Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid to 20 million people that did not previously have insurance, There's been more early detection in the areas of cancer, less medical debt, fewer evictions, and he went on to say that the American Rescue Plan saved 15 million people close to $800 a year. Now, he also talked about the fact that the new legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, passed this year without any Republican support, not one GOP vote, extended maternity coverage to a full year from its current 36 days. And the new budget makes these permanent. And he said we'll expand Medicaid to at least 2 million more Americans, making health care affordable, which, again, no GOP representative supported, means getting regular shots for free. America has more advanced medications than anywhere in the world, and we finally took on Big Pharma and won. He mentioned something that I talked about last week, which is, he said, instead of paying whatever drug companies want to charge, we were able to drive down prices, and that includes at the Department of Veteran Affairs, which can now negotiate its own drug prices. And he used the example of insulin, and that's the one that I talked about. He said, beginning January 1st of 2023, we capped insulin at $35 a month for seniors. We need to cap that cost for everyone, including the 200,000 children in this country who need this drug to stay alive. And he pointed out that at this point, 3 big pharmaceutical companies have cut the prices to decent levels. And again, that's something that I mentioned last week. He also pointed out that the Inflation Reduction Act has lowered, obviously, the medication bill for seniors, but he said it also lowered their Medicare maximum deductible to $2,000 per year. Biden said that's compared to $10,000, $12,000, and $14,000 deductible per year for expensive cancer drugs, for example, in the past. And he spoke about the Republicans' inability to provide a detailed version of their proposed budget. And again, many of you are familiar with this, but I want to point it out because what was the origin of the French Revolution? Budget deficits. What was the origin of some of the American Revolution? No taxation without representation. I mean, look at the similarities here. This is not an accident. And I just am planting that seed for everyone to think about. Again, as I said before, yes, Pluto and Aquarius has a lot of stuff. I do want to talk about a transformation of the power of groups. That's a huge topic. We're going to watch that happen all over the next 20 years. The formation of the evolutionary process through the advancement of technology. That's going to be huge. Artificial intelligence is going to be huge, but so will surveillance. Artificial intelligence's ability to surveil everyone's actions. How many of us say, oh my God, I was just talking to my friend about getting a new pair of shoes at DSW, and now I've got 50 ads on Facebook and on my computer for DSW ads, or whatever. I wanted to buy a car. Now I'm inundated with all these car ads. And we all go, who's been listening? Like Big Brother? Is that Big Brother out there? To a certain extent it is, but that's a whole nother topic. So Biden made a comment, which I thought was very interesting, especially since also last week or the week before I mentioned that the North Node, the transiting North Node, had conjoined with Venus in Taurus. Now, that can have a lot of different positive effects, and we hope it does, but Taurus is about values. Okay, when you boil it all down, Venus's Taurus rules the second house, and that's our material resources. But underneath those material resources, why do we have them? Why do we want them? Why do we desire them? Because they are of value to us. And for very good reason, because they help ensure our very survival. So Biden said 2 weeks ago, I released my budget. And he quoted his father, who said, used to say, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. And then he went on to say we value seniors and that no one making less than $400,000 under his Inflation Reduction Act would pay, or under his budget proposal now, will pay a single penny more in taxes. And he pointed out that the GOP wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, they do seem to be a political group or party that would rather fight against things, and here we have Mars entering Cancer again, fight against things that protect people rather than fighting for things that they think would better protect people. And a perfect example is this Affordable Care Act, because he says, Biden, that they keep backing plans that will gut Medicaid and other benefits and the Affordable Care Act in the form of Medicaid, right? So it's like you can fight against something, but what are you fighting for, right? And he mentioned that today, or this was yesterday, South Carolina became the 40th state to expand Medicaid. And he went on to say that the Affordable Care Act has developed deep roots in this country. We always talk about the costs, but it saves lives as well. And even now, some Republicans are still intent on repealing the Affordable Care Act. So Biden went on to say, we still haven't seen the GOP's budget. Their budget will show what they value. And if they plan to slash $2 trillion from Medicaid and want to make deep cuts, that these would lead to 70 million people in America, mostly seniors, disabled, and children, to losing their coverage. He mentioned also that the Republicans are always talking about rural Americans, but he asked, what about the rural hospitals? And this is something that's also become extremely prevalent in the abortion issue with these restrictive abortion rules and legislation throughout different states in the country. He said already rural residents have to travel twice as far in some of these cities because they've closed hospitals there. Now, in the abortion case, some of that is because of the legislation, and they're afraid of getting sued, so they close maternity wards. But in other places, it's simply that they don't have the funding for it. So he said, if you're going to cause rural residents to have to travel twice as far to get to the cities or more urban areas where the better hospitals are, or where the only hospital is, that means they're twice as likely to die. And more rural hospitals will close under the GOP plans. He mentioned that Medicaid pays for nursing care, home care, for about 2/3 of all seniors. So, you know, there's a lot going on here in terms of all of this stuff, and that he concluded pretty much by saying 13 years ago, thanks to the leadership of President Obama and his staff and many members in Congress, we made history. We changed America. We gave millions peace of mind. We did something else. We took a giant step toward the principle that health care is a right, not a privilege. And he concluded by saying, we're not all the way there, so let's finish the job. Let's keep building an economy from the middle up and out. So as we look at issues like this one I've spent a good number of minutes expanding on, which is healthcare as a human right, right? Not just the right of the rich or the elites who can afford it. And we know also that Pluto, which I said last week, is obviously now in Aquarius, but only until June 11th, which is when he'll retrograde back into Capricorn for the rest of the year. We want to look back at that period because, remember, it ain't over till it's over, as Yogi Berra used to say. So as Pluto enters Aquarius now, but only for a little less than 3 short months, there's more potentially shocking transformation ahead. And that's because Pluto's concerned with conscious evolution, while Uranus-ruled Aquarius reminds us, again, as I said earlier, that the only constant really is change. So I think while Pluto's in Aquarius, the energy is going to be quite combustible. And if Pluto's likened to nuclear energy, especially since the planet was discovered in 1930 and led to the development of the nuclear bomb, and the fixed air sign Aquarius is, Aquarius or Uranus is often likened to Prometheus in Greek mythology, who saw mankind without fire, took pity on them, and gave them the secret of how to create fire. And so it's an air sign, but it's related to rapid change. Think about taking two sticks and twigs and rubbing them together and starting to get a spark, or holding a magnifying glass, between the sun and the dried out leaf and setting that leaf on fire eventually. So Aquarius may just prove the catalyst that ignites Pluto's nuclear energy, or its propensity for nuclear energy, in the form of change, rapid transformational change. And again, we can hark back just to the cycles of Pluto and Uranus, which had their most recent conjunction in the mid-1960s. We may well see a recurrence of this energy over these next few months in the form of social upheaval. And that's because Aquarius represents groups, marginalized and otherwise, and Pluto represents power, as I've said many times. So what's different this time around from the last time Pluto ingressed into Aquarius? Well, for one thing, we were then in the age of Pisces, which started around 0 AD, give or take, right? This is the springing up of Christianity, born out of Judaism, the Old Testament, and the beginning of the New Testament teachings. And then, of course, by 700 AD, we had the Quran and the third major monotheistic religion come into being. So Pisces is about the collective, but it brought us many different kinds of energies that were Piscean oriented, right? I can be the victim, I can be the martyr, But these ages last thousands of years, and astrologers don't all agree, or astronomers even, I don't know if astronomers actually give credence to these ages, but they can be between somewhere between 20,000 years and 2,000 years and 2,500 years, right? So there are many who would agree that we're now in the age of Aquarius. So the point I'm trying to make, and that is because, and Stephen Forrest makes this argument, I think, quite well. If you think about the end of the 19th century and it having brought us from the horse and buggy to the automobile, to the airplane, and then to the rocket or spaceship that enabled us to land men on the moon, you get the idea of the kind of technological advancement that Aquarius is capable of bringing as opposed to Pisces. So we had, my grandfather used to say, he was born in 1895 and died in 1987, and my dad used to say that my grandfather would note that he believed he lived during the greatest age of all of mankind because he saw the technology shift from exactly what I just said, the horse and buggy to the car to the airplane, etc. So, if we're cognizant of that, Pluto is going into Aquarius at the same time when we might consider that we are at the early stages, or have been for 100 or a little bit more years, the age of Aquarius. We have a different kind of mixture of energies here than from the last time 246 years ago when Pluto entered Aquarius, right? While it was during the age of Pisces. Might have been a bit more rebellious in the sense that it was fighting to move out of Pisces and into Aquarius, when a lot of the hanging back Saturn kind of energy would be in the tradition of Pisces. So now it's interesting because, of course, we also have Saturn newly in Pisces as of March 7th. So the shift here, I mentioned last week or the week before that Saturn in Pisces has to bring down the walls to let the collective energy in. And Pluto in Aquarius wants to fight for the underdog, the marginalized, those who are less fortunate, etc. And in the age of Aquarius, that may become more probable, since there's going to be exponentially more technological advancement than there has been over at least the past 100 or 125 years. And that's something we'll talk about in the future too. But just recognize that we're in a recurrence of the old energy with a slight twist, right? And that those who want to hang back, are Saturnine in nature because they adhere to tradition. They don't like progressive information. They don't like progressive technology. We can see by the stagnation in the U.S. Congress how little they've done to regulate these social media platforms that rely on algorithms and other technology or technological tools to accomplish their purpose of being able to spread information so quickly. And they have absolutely no idea what it is to even begin to recognize how they might be able to regulate it, right? So we're in a kind of no man's land there. And Pluto in Aquarius may rocket them forward so fast that where it won't be until we get a whole new slew of young representatives in the Congress, both the House and the Senate, that they could even begin to grapple with this. But, okay, I digress. So, it's time to say goodbye and to thank you all for joining me today and to tell you that I hope you found this information helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me again next week on March 31st for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.